My name is Stephen David. I'm an AWS Principal Solutions Architect, and our topic for today is Port .NET applications from .NET Framework to .NET Core. Let's go over the agenda for today. First, let's go through the story of .NET. This will give us a sense of history and how we got where we are today. Next, let's talk through the benefits of porting from .NET Framework to .NET. Why are we going through this effort, and what's the advantage of making this change? Next, let's talk through some of the common challenges that you may be faced with when migrating from .NET Framework to .NET, which will lead into a discussion about Porting Assistant for .NET. This is an open source tool that AWS created and contributed to the community to help overcome these challenges. And we'll round out the session by doing a demo of Porting Assistant for .NET so that you can see the tool in action. Let's review the history of .NET. So starting in 2002, .NET Framework 1.0 was released in February of that year. Microsoft then continued to make releases and updates of the .NET Framework for the rest of that, basically for the next decade. And that progressed well up to 2012. In 2016, Microsoft went ahead and pivoted their strategy a little bit. They started working on .NET Core. Now, .NET Core 1.0 was released, and the difference here is that while .NET Framework was intended to run on Microsoft's server, .NET Core was intended to be multi-platform and allow for a smaller, more compact framework that could be run on a number of platforms. Now, .NET Framework continued to exist, and there was actually a release of an update to the .NET Framework in 2019. And that release came in. That was their final release. So .NET Framework 4.8 was the final release for .NET Framework. There won't be additional updates from Microsoft. From that point forward, it'll only be the .NET Core version of the language that's going forward. Now, they did rebrand .NET Core to .NET. So starting in .NET 5, it's no longer called .NET Core, but it is the multi-platform version of the language, and it can be deployed on Linux or Windows or Mac. It can go across these different platforms. Now that version of the language also has two flavors, right? It has the current version that they offer. So .NET, the odd numbers like .NET 5 or .NET 7, these are the current versions of the platform, or the LTS, the long-term support versions. The even number releases are the long-term support. And the differentiating factor between these is that the current versions are supported for 18 months, and the long-term support version of these releases are supported for 3 years. So you have a longer window when you're using the LTS version of .NET versus the current version. One other thing to note, .NET 3.1 was the last .NET Core labeled version of the language, and that end of life for that one is December 3rd, 2022. So Microsoft is pushing everything towards these .NET multi-platform version of the language, and that is the future of how .NET will proceed going forward. And this is a much more compact version than .NET Framework was, and also the multi-platform support offers a lot of flexibility in how you can deploy this, where you can deploy it, and what you can do with this language. Why move from .NET Framework to .NET? Well, one reason is Microsoft license freedom. Just switching from a Microsoft license server over to a Linux server, we're seeing a cost savings of 30% or more. Right, and we're going to see a chart in just a moment where it actually, for a lot of the instances, it was actually greater than 30% savings. That is a compelling reason to move over. That's a lot of cost savings for simply switching your OS. In addition, by going to containerized.NET app, you have more deployment options and more availability of cloud native tooling. .NET Framework is pretty old at this point. All the tooling that's coming out is targeting the .NET, the newer versions, .NET 6, and things like that. And by moving and migrating to that newer version of .NET, you're able to take advantage of this cloud native tooling and better containerization options. We are also seeing performance improvements, somewhere in a 20 to 30% performance improvement when running .NET on Linux. That's a lot of improvement, so that you can get better performance out of the same hardware simply by moving up to a modern version of .NET. Finally, the last area I want to highlight is you can move to Linux with x86, but you could also do a Linux with an ARM 64 processor. AWS, we have the Graviton 2 and the Graviton 3 processors. These allow you to run those same .NET workloads on an ARM architecture and see additional cost savings above and beyond simply switching to Linux on x86. So let's look at this chart that shows a comparison of running your .NET application on Windows versus Linux, Linux x86, or Linux and ARM processor running on Graviton, so you can take advantage of the Graviton pricing with our EC2 instances. So we have a couple different series here. If you look at the bottom, you see the M series is our general purpose series of compute, or the R series, this is our kind of RAM heavy series, or the C series, which is our compute heavy series. And what's interesting to see is when I look at our price for performance per month here, as they're showing there at the bottom, the bluish purple box is if I run it on Windows. The pink is if I run it on Linux with x86, and then the yellow is Graviton 2, our ARM-based processor. And you can see there's a huge savings just switching from the Windows to the Linux. And there we're seeing an estimated 48% savings on these instances. That's a big jump down in the cost. And then you're seeing additional savings when you go down to a Graviton 2. That's more like a 59% savings. So you can run the same workload on a Graviton 2 and see a 59% cost reduction from what you're seeing over there if I run it on a Windows instance. That's a noteworthy savings. That's for a lot of our customers who find that compelling, worth investigating. You can do a lot more with that money in that case. In addition, it's not shown on the chart here, but we also have Graviton 3, which typically offers about a 25% performance improvement even over our Graviton 2. So by moving to .NET, away from the .NET framework, you're going to be able to take advantage of these continuously improving capabilities that you do need to be on a more modern architecture to take advantage of. Now, there are some challenges when moving from .NET Framework to .NET Core. You may have .NET API calls that are not compatible with the newer .NET. In that case, you need to see what alternatives you have available to you. Same thing, you may have NuGet packages that were designed specifically for .NET Framework and require some of the libraries or functionality of the framework. In those cases, you would have to see alternative ways to achieve that functionality. And then sometimes just the difficulty in assessing what it would take to port from .NET Framework to .NET is a challenge all on its own. Understanding what is the compatibility issues that are there. And then the physical act of actually doing the porting. All of these can become barriers to moving from Framework over to .NET. As a response to some of the challenges that we were seeing people run into, AWS created an open source analysis tool called Porting Assistant for .NET. This tool, you can use it to scan your .NET Framework applications. You can use it to generate a .NET Core compatibility assessment. This helps you understand what in your application may not be compatible with the newer versions of .NET. And it also helps you understand what it would take to move that over, and can actually move over some applications and some functionality over to .NET Core for you. This does a lot to help you overcome the challenges we were seeing. You'll understand if you're using a library and it's not compatible with .NET, and you might even be able to see the alternatives that are there and make the choice to migrate them over automatically, or at least be aware of what the manual effort will be when doing the migration. So Porting Assistant for .NET comes in two flavors. We have a standalone tool. This can be installed on any machine It doesn't have to have Visual Studio installed with it, and you can use that. You can point it at your solution in your code base and actually run the assessment and the migrations directly from the porting assistant by itself as a standalone tool. In addition to that, a lot of our developers do have Visual Studio installed, and they can then use the integrated version of the porting assistant within Visual Studio itself. So you've opened up the solution, you can go directly and work with Porting Assistant right there in Visual Studio. Going on this modernization journey with .NET offers a number of benefits. When you move from .NET Framework to .NET, you'll see better performance, certainly better price for performance on what you're doing. You're able to run this on a cross-platform way. You can choose what kind of platform you want to host it on. This also opens up the ability to run your application in cloud native services, things like Lambda, where you can now move towards more of a microservices oriented architecture instead of the traditional monoliths that were built in .NET Framework. There are some prerequisites for moving over to .NET. One, we want to install the Porting Assistant for .NET, either the desktop tool or the Visual Studio IDE plugin. This will allow us to do the assessment and get the assistance from Porting Assistant for .NET. You are going to need the source code for your solution, for your legacy .NET application. That .NET application will need to be written in C#, and it needs to be a framework of 3.5 or greater for you to be able to use the tool to do the migration. And we're looking to move that application over to one of the more modern versions of .NET. Preferably at this point, we'd be looking at .NET 6 or beyond, but we can do .3.1 SDK or above. We have the workflow here for how we would go about doing this modernization activity. First, we'll install the prerequisites on a development machine, get the source code, make sure we have Porting Assistant running on that machine. And then we're going to take advantage of some of this key functionality, right? We'll do the compatibility assessment that the Porting Assistant for .NET allows us to do, so we can evaluate our .NET Framework application and see how easy it is to move it over to .NET Core, what challenges we might be running into with this particular application. We'll see a listing of the source files that are contained in the incompatible API, so we can go directly and see how important those are to the project, what can be isolated, what needs to be addressed right away, what we think we're going to spend the most time on as we're doing this migration process. And some porting activities can just be automated. There's a known way it was handled in the past and a known way to do it in the new, more the .NET Core way of doing it. And those can be automated, and the porting system will give you the option of automatically changing those. And that will allow you to move more quickly. You could also just export the assessment. You could export that and get a sense of this is what we think it'll take. And now as a team, we can go in and consider how we want to approach this in the long run. That would maybe lead to resolving some of these API compatibility issues that were identified by the assessment. And then we can go ahead and even deploy that application to Linux or to containers or Lambdas. We can start with seeing what does it look like now that we've migrated from .NET Framework over to .NET. So some common questions we're running into. One of the first ones is, what about ASP.NET Web Forms? So ASP.NET Web Forms, there's no support for those in .NET Core 3.1 or later. Basically, it was a .NET Framework capability. Microsoft itself recommends that if you have web form type functionality, to move towards ASP.NET Core Blazor instead. And this is the official way to move forward. Blazor offers the closest programming model in .NET Core 3.1 or later, and Porting Assistant will help you with understanding how to migrate from ASP.NET Web Forms to ASP.NET Core Blazor. Another common question is, what about WCF? There is no support for WCF in .NET Core 3.1 or later. There is, however, a Core WCF community-led effort. And this effort is a path forward to move from WCF to .NET Core. And Porting Assistant does support taking WCF applications and migrating them over to Core WCF. Let's do a demo of using the Porting Assistant for .NET. So first, I'm going to go to my machine. I've already installed the Porting Assistant for .NET into my Visual Studio. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio with my sample application, which I've already downloaded as well. So I got my sample application, I got the source code, downloaded it, and I've now opened it up in Visual Studio. And I can see that that's loading up over here on the right. And just so that we can see the application run, it's an MVC web application. I'm going to go ahead and run it real quick. I'll get my application to kind of boot in and run. So this is a .NET Framework 4.8 application. I can see that it's functioning. I get to get that going, and that's great. I want to first assess it. I want to see how compatible it is with porting over to some version of .NET, .NET 5 or 6 or something of that nature. So let's come over here to extensions. I've installed as one of my extensions the Porting Assistant for .NET. I haven't used it yet though, so I want to come over to settings. And once you get to settings, I'm going to go down to Porting Assistant for .NET in general, and I want to choose the framework that I'm going to use. So in my system, I have 3.1 installed and I have .NET 5. If you have on your system .NET 6 installed or something later, that would also show up here. I'm going to go ahead and choose to do .NET 5. So now I've run the application, and I want to see what it would take to go ahead and run the assessment. I'm going to need to click over here and check out my application a little bit. So let's try, maybe we can click in here, look at one of my view models or something of that nature, have opened something up. Now I can go in under Porting Assessment and run full. And it's going to go ahead and get started with the Porting Assistant for .NET. And I can choose what my AWS profile I want to use to get that done. I'll go with the default one that I have set up. And let's run that. And you can see it running down here in the bottom. It's going through the steps it takes to analyze your solution. And when it's done, we'll have an assessment of our application for porting from .NET Framework 4.8 to .NET 5. Now that Porting Assistant has completed it, it gives you a list of either errors or warnings or what might be complications for porting this application from .NET Framework to .NET Core. So you can see there's no errors for this particular application, but there are some warnings from a compatibility perspective. So now I've got an assessment. I can take that and I can use that to either go and make some changes on my own, or if I want, I can actually run with the .NET Porting Assistant. I can go ahead and port to .NET Core with the Porting Assistant. And I can do it on a solution or project level. In this case, I'm going to try it for our solution. Now, it is noting that, hey, porting is final and cannot be undone. We want to make sure that we check that. If you have your code checked in somewhere in source code, this is not a problem, but they will change the code on your local machine. And once that's done, it doesn't have a revert back. So make sure that you have another copy of it stored somewhere permanently in case you don't like the changes that were made. After that, that's it. You'll now have your solution. It's going to have been ported successfully to .NET 5. When I hit OK, it's going to ask me to reload. It's made some changes to packages. So let's reload all of that, and we'll have the changes done to our solution. And we now have what was a .NET 4.8 framework application ported over to .NET 5. And that was it for our demo of using the porting assistant for .NET to migrate your application from .NET Framework to .NET. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you next time.